with ChatGPT coming onto the market, we're going to see that come into industry over the next few years.
Well, there'll be massive investment in people trying to work out how you can take that output and say for sure whether it's a human or whether it's ChatGPT. I think the digitisation of the NHS records have been something that's been in the media for a long time.
I've recently had experience of information was written down in hospital and also put onto a system, but not the same information that was written down was on the system, which resulted in unforeseen circumstances.
We're not talking ridiculously crazy infrastructure, are we? We're talking good Wi-Fi around a building. It seems mad that we don't have that in 2023. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today we're joined by Richard Fishburn, the head of technical consultancy at Spectrum Digital. Please do us a favour, if you like the series, then do share it, do subscribe, do follow. We do appreciate all of your help. And with all that said, welcome to Tomorrow's Workplace Today. So, welcome to the podcast, Rich Fishburn.
Thank you for having me.
So we all obviously know and love you well, but do you want, for listeners, watchers, do you want to introduce yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm head of technical consulting, which means that basically I start to talk to new prospects about what it is they do at the moment to try and uncover maybe some pain points with their processes, whether that be kind of transactional processes or people-based processes, with a view to delivering kind of tailored demonstrations that might be able to show how some of our automation tool set might be able to help them address some of those pain points.
Very good. Let's be honest, you're the brains of the bunch, aren't you, really? And I include myself in that.
One of the brains. Vaguely.
I guess we don't come into that. I think that might be those two.
You were nodding, but yeah. No, it's great to have you on, Rich.
Wishfully
Good to be here.
Thinking.
And I want to start the conversation around a picture I saw on Twitter the other day.
Okay.
So there's a tweet by Merrin Somerset Webb, who we need to get on the podcast at some point, by the way. But anyway, she tweeted a picture of a doctor lying on the floor surrounded by forms, and the kind of caption was that these are all the forms that a nurse has to fill in for every admission into hospital. And the commentary around it was that they have to spend about 70% of their time doing paperwork. And I just thought that's scary and interesting. And it just got me thinking, why are we in that situation? And when what we do is automation, why in 2023 is it now? Why are we in the position where the NHS I've got that much paperwork and that much bureaucracy, and I wanted to just throw that over to the room and get your thoughts, people. Tread carefully.
Yeah, tread carefully.
One easy answer to that are we looking for?
Well, I just wanted your thoughts, really. So I guess I'll start with, is it a surprise? We've probably all had experience with the NHS over the years. Is that a surprise or not?
I think the digitisation of the NHS records has been something that's been in the media for a long time, hasn't it? The success or not of that whole process. So I suppose it makes sense that something must be feeding that mountain of paperwork, doesn't it? So is it surprised that doctors fill in lots of forms? Probably not.
But the thing is, it's a bit like the tiers of management you have in NHS. I mean, we've got so many tiers within the NHS of people making a decision that goes to the next tier to go, yeah, I'll rubber stamp that, but I'll just pass it up the line. And then inherently, we've now got it, or it's evolved into this beast that are medical professionals that we want to be treating people, basically having to fill in all those forms. I've seen the picture, and I mean, it's ridiculous. It looks about 10 foot long if the way they spread it out. So,
I suppose some of that must be around legislation as well, wouldn't it? So it's got to be kind of protective of the doctors, probably, because
where there's blame, there's a claim.
Yeah.
But is that any different from any other industry that work in where people need to have traceability and auditability of records and information to make sure that they've followed a process? I don't think it is, and yet most businesses that we speak to are not filling out, I don't know how many forms there are on that picture, but 25 forms on a daily basis, or are they?
Well, somebody's thought that that's a good thing to do, to be able to, show some evidence of some decision-making process, haven't they? They've got to fill in this form either because there's got to be exchange of information to somebody else, or there's got to be evidence of something, haven't they? But a piece of paper is the worst possible form of doing that, isn't it? I mean, it's lost. You've got handwriting. It's not accessible because it's only in one place. So you're not really fixing any of the problems that you've got with it by introducing a paper form, are you?
what the notorious doctor's handwriting. I mean,
exactly.
that travels well. I'll come in. I've recently had sort of knowledge / experience of where information was written down in hospital and also put onto a system, but not the same information that was written down was on the system, which resulted in unforeseen sort of circumstances, if you will. But for me, I think it's probably the age-old argument. The NHS is such a behemoth. It's a cost thing ultimately, and it's not necessarily the total costs, because obviously over time the efficiencies etc would be would pay back 10 times, 100 times probably. It's more around they haven't got the money to pay nurses a proper wage, they haven't got money to get up-to-date equipment, keep the buildings up to spec. So actually changing from good old pen and paper is probably not even on the to-do list, let alone in the thought process, I would guess.
It's interesting you say that, because I think there's been another big push was, and you're right, kind of the infrastructure that's in place will drive some of these decisions. So there was another big push to use digital pens, which meant you could have a paper-based form still, which has kind of got an ID built into the form background. So the pen, when the doctor's writing, knows which form it's using and knows which field it's filling in, and then the pen can be docked and it can send information back to say, this is the digital copy of that form, and it can turn the doctor's handwriting into digital text as well. But more importantly, it can capture that digital form as that person's writing. And that kind of got round some of those infrastructure problems, because you didn't really need a tablet that might be expensive to give to hundreds of people. You didn't need an active Wi-Fi connection, because you can just go and stick your pen in the dock at the end of the process that's connected via Ethernet to your network or whatever else. So it's going to be progressive, isn't it? Different solutions are going to be right at different points in time. Yeah. As the NHS improves its infrastructure and gets better Wi-Fi and all those sorts of things, you might find more of a tablet-based solution rather than a digital pen.
We're not talking ridiculously crazy infrastructure, are we? We're talking good Wi-Fi around a building, which it just seems mad that we don't have that. Maybe we do, but if that is the blocker to this, it seems mad that we don't have that in 2023.
They separated it out into different trusts and they can all manage their own different budgets. Because I know, again, if you look on Canon's website, they've got a hospital up in I think it's St James in Newcastle, whatever. They're using the document management system that we sell there for, and they're using it for patient records and bits and pieces. But you end up with a hodgepodge of different systems. It's a bit like having a global business, I guess, and picking one ERP or one sort of suite of products to sort of link everything together. But it seems to be so siloed. But it's not just in one hospital. It's kind of like each department within a hospital. Because I remember taking my granddad, and because he had a pacemaker and he had diabetes, every time we went to different departments, he had to repeat himself, and he was getting really annoyed. Just the basic logic, he was thinking, well, hang on, I've just told that guy that, why am I having to tell you the same thing? And again, things get missed. That siloed sort of issue is just always the same.
I'd go as far as, you're right. So I have to go every 4 or 5 weeks. I've got an ear ailment, so I have to go to ENT. Last week, I got 3 letters in 2 envelopes for the same appointment. So printed, obviously. So I'm thinking, one, just ask me my email address and you can email it to me. Surely that's A, more efficient, and B, definitely cost effective. And then it's the whole, you look at my mum went in, she's got arthritis in one of her hips, and they went, right, we need to do an x-ray. My mum went, well, I've done an x-ray, is it not on my records? And they were like, no. So, well, actually, she actually paid to have it done. So, but there's no joined up between, NHS and private. So there was an x-ray. My mum, being old, had forgotten about it. So guess what? The NHS now, they have to x-ray her. And it's like, with just a bit more joined up thinking, we could get so much more out of however much the NHS costs. What is it, 350 million a week, is it, do they say, or whatever it is?
The thing for me though, like you mentioned other industries, you look at financial services and the whole digital transformation piece there, when anything's linked to money, they can still bring it all together. I know they've still got a bit to go, but like, for example, you can get apps now that open banking, you can link to all your other different cards, the fact that you can go on a credit report and everybody knows what you've been doing. It's like, well, hang on, if you can do it for just your basic credit report or just to apply for a credit card or whatever, why isn't there some sort of central service for all your different health? There should be just one record. And we mentioned it before, I think when Jack Laters was on the thing, he was talking about that's a good use case for obviously blockchain and things like that. You could have your own record that everybody has, you can give with permission, you give people access to and things like that. But
well, I think that's got to be the right approach, having one central record and then having some local choice about how you feed that record. You know, we want to use digital pens because we're in an ancient building that's got massive stone walls, it hasn't got Wi-Fi, so it makes sense for us. Actually, we want to use tablets because there's only 2 people in our department and we can share one tablet, but it's all feeding the same kind of central system so that people get choice. But
I guess it is the size of the investment and, you know, what government wants to make that investment on the basis that that government is probably not going to get the benefit of it. It's going to be the next government that gets the benefit of it, potentially. But we've got to do something surely as a nation. Hi guys, just jumping in, I want to talk about one of the services we offer, which is robotic process automation, also known as RPA. That is software that replicates human behavior. So if you've got people downloading spreadsheets, attaching them to emails, going on portals, downloading information, moving data around, all that stuff is perfect for a robot. So if that's interesting, get in touch. Let's have a chat. Let's see if we can help. Enough from me. Back to the conversation.
I think it's been talked about, isn't it? I think that they set all sorts of different agendas to be paperless by a certain particular time. And like you say, different governments, they just keep moving it on. They change the agenda to something else.
They seem to have fixed the central thing now, I think. I've got the NHS app and can see all of my past appointments and all my records and everything else. I don't think you can see documents on it yet, can you? But they still kind of come through the post, as it were. But it seems to have a central record, at least, depending on whether I've been to the hospital or been to my GP or whatever else, or had blood tests at the hospital. There's always a record of it on that app. So,
all right, let's move away from that before I get myself in trouble in terms of politics or something. But let's move more towards business, Rich. So, obviously, you spend a lot of your time out speaking to business owners or directors of organisations. A lot of those people are looking to automate those businesses. And I guess for watchers, listeners that are probably in that situation where they've got an organisation that they're looking to improve in terms of efficiency and automate, what would the advice be that you would give them?
So I think it's, if you're looking for kind of the low-hanging fruit, first things to go for, I think it's anything that's transactional. And generally we break those two things down into kind of document-centric transactional processes. So anything where there is, you know, a document of some description coming into the business, usually driving a process, and it's coming in transactionally in volume, then that's one of the first places to look. And then likewise, any process that's transactional in its nature. So if you're a large company that employs lots of new employees on a seasonal basis, or has employees come and go just by the nature of what you do, then that's a transactional process. Isn't necessarily a document driving that. There's a person at the heart of that, but the onboarding process is a process that needs kind of looking at, refining and automating, because that tends to be an area where there's lots of information flowing and lots of manual kind of work being done. So transactional document heavy processes, transactional people heavy processes.
What examples of documents, when you talk about kind of structured documents, transactional documents, what sort of thing should business owners be looking for?
Yeah, so if you look into finance departments, for instance, the one that a lot of people talk about nowadays is invoice processing. So it's the accounts payable process. So you've got purchase invoices coming in. Typically, that process is actually driven by what happens at the front end. The invoice is almost the last bit of that process. People like to talk about invoice processing, but you've got to start focusing really on what you're doing at point of order rather than point of invoicing. So they want to see efficiencies in the accounts payable team. The purchase ledger clerk doesn't want to spend all their time checking documents, typing information in, but the ordering team, the purchasing team need to have done their job properly or in the right way, and being empowered to do that job in the right way, have the right tools and everything else for that process at the back end to work correctly. So that's one transactional process. It could be on the sales ledger. So if you're an organisation that tends to stock lots of small, has high volume turnover but small value sales, they tend to be the ones where you're getting a lot of customer orders coming in, and typically they're still arriving, on a PDF or in the body of an email or as an Excel document. and there's a lot of effort that takes place to validate that and get it into the system and get it starting to be picked, packed, and delivered.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you think about it, a lot of companies do focus on that P2P, the purchase to pay process, which is actually looking to make it more efficient to pay suppliers. And I've always been not baffled, but it's always I found it slightly amusing that people haven't focused on how quickly can we get an order, process the order, get it out and invoice it, and then we get paid quicker. And I've always found that why people don't tend to lead with how can I get my order processed quickly to get me paid quicker. And then there's also that spin-off of the fact of actually free someone up maybe in AP to chase credit, to get that money back in. It's always there's a lot of focus on I just need to sort my suppliers out, and I'm thinking, what about yourself?
Yeah, but the suppliers are important, aren't they? Because you can't get a product out the door if you haven't got it in stock, kind of thing. And I think people see that not paying suppliers is going to enter them being on stop and is going to affect their supply chain in such a way. And there's financial benefits usually, isn't there? Especially in that kind of high transactional, high volume type way. You can negotiate discounts for early payments and those sorts of things. So I think it's been a bit more of, and the tech's been there as well, to be fair, to drive that process.
I guess e-commerce has been automating that process for many years, actually.
Yeah,
people driving people to the website instead of
they've either done EDI or they've done e-commerce, and then the bits in the middle, telephone or e-bills, like you say, that system generated sort of PDFs. Although when you speak to a lot of manufacturers, they're still sending out a lot of PDF orders out of their ERP systems, aren't they? So there's still someone at the other end printing that off and obviously processing it as an order. So
I think it depends on whether it's retail or business as well. So, if you've got retail customers, you've got consumers coming in and buying from a website, then, they're getting more used to going onto websites like Amazon or whatever and ordering goods from it. So they can, they're willing to take that effort to go on and look for something and put it into a form and start that transaction off. Whereas businesses seem to be a bit more, they're already entering that order into their ERP system, aren't they? So that's their data entry. They just want to press a button and have their order appear with their supplier, don't they? They don't want to then go and put it onto the supplier's portal, as it were. So the emphasis really sits with the supplier then, rather than, a consumer that's entering the order in, I suppose. And that's why it's taken a bit longer maybe for EDI platforms and those sorts of things to have an impact on businesses.
We've been talking about accounts payable for a long time, and I've been saying it's quite a mature market for a long time, and yet we still, every day, every week, we're still getting asked about accounts payable automation. So where do you think that is? Have most businesses now automated that process, or is there still a majority of organisations out there using paper and people to manage that?
I think we still very rarely come across people that have already got a solution in place for accounts payable. They might have done elements of it, or they might have done it in a quite an old school way. But very few people are starting to kind of fully automate the end-to-end process. And I think it's because you've got some people where that process will be very simple. You've got some people where that process is much more complex. It surprises me. I've been kind of talking AP for 15 odd years now, and I'm still learning almost week to week. You go in and you talk to somebody and they do something slightly different to what you've heard of previously. And so being able to react to that difference in people's processes and say, well, for whatever way you can meet that challenge of that particular process, I think it's really important. I think we're finding more and more complex processes as we go along now. People with more and more kind of niche edge cases.
What sort of thing?
So it could be kind of, so sorts of things that we're coming across at the moment are, well, it's been interesting because the market volatility with pricing has driven surcharges. I think we've been finding a lot of recently, guys. And so that's, put pressure on people like myself to come up with solutions to how you can deal with surcharges on a document. So, steel getting delivered when you buy that raw material and that comes into the business, it's probably going to be charged at a different price to what you put the order on. So it's those sorts of market changes which drive change within the process, and things that you have to react to. It's not just, AP won't ever be a stagnant thing.
Yeah. So if we kind of park accounts payable and sales order processing for a while, what are the other emerging trends around automation that we're seeing in the market? I mean, you guys as well, you speak to customers on a daily basis. What are you seeing?
Well, for me, Rich and I worked on something recently, and it was to do with they're a manufacturer, and it was to do with back flushing. I had to go and look it up. I had no idea what they were going on about. But actually, they were brilliant because the amount of detail they'd gone down to, it worked out, roughly speaking, they were spending 1,450 hours a year entering information back into their system, and that supervisors doing that. So that means they're not on the production line overseeing what's going on because they're having to update the systems. And we've been talking about potentially a little Spectro bot or something like that, being able to take that pain away and actually release those supervisors to keep manning the lines. So it's a bit like with AP, and I'm not taking the conversation back to AP, but it's a bit like niche things now, and I think that on the AP side of things, we are now getting to the point, because it is quite a established sort of solution, if you like, that the ones that haven't done it yet are the ones that have got a niche requirement that makes it a bit more complex, and then the off-the-shelf solutions can't help, and that's where we come in with the likes of Rich's expertise. But for me, it's those sort of weird and wonderful where people are actually starting to, because it's hard to recruit. There is a trend in some of our pods around recruitment and how tough it is. It's around actually, if we can take some of the boring stuff, let's go back to the NHS side of things. I'm sure a nurse would rather be looking after a number of patients, making sure they're all right, than filling in copious amounts of forms. And it's the same in the commercial sector, where because it is hard to get keep staff or get staff, actually if we can make your life a bit more enjoyable and a bit more fulfilling by getting a bot or some other technology to do that, then it's got to be worthwhile.
I think it's that niche bit that you mentioned as well. It can be a niche back office system or a legacy back office system that drives some of this. So as much as we talk about transactional processes and everything else, sometimes what stops people from automating is, well, at the end of the process, I need to enter the order or enter the invoice or do the back flushing process. And we can't do that because our legacy system doesn't have an import, a file import or an API or whatever else. And so a lot of our conversations nowadays are people that maybe have tried to automate and other suppliers haven't been able to help them because they've got that legacy infrastructure or that legacy application. That's where bots start to play a role, doesn't it? Because if somebody can do the process manually by logging into a piece of software or a browser and pressing buttons, then a bot should be able to do that as well in most cases, and that kind of fixes that puzzle bit.
Agreed. And nobody wants to replatform their ERP, do they? It's just the worst project in the world, and so people put it off for as long as they possibly can, and that's where RPA can fill that gap.
Especially when they've got customizations and all those sorts of, and other applications that they may be doing something with and reporting, and people have moved away from having standardized systems in some respect, haven't they? So whereas the RPA can respect that.
Okay, me again, just jumping in to talk about one of the processes that we often get asked to automate, which is the processing of supplier invoices, also known as accounts payable automation. So what does that mean? Well, most businesses receive invoices from their suppliers, and a lot of businesses still have people that are manually reviewing those invoices, making sure that they're correct, making sure they're accurate, and then manually rekeying them into a finance system or an ERP system. Well, our solution can automate that process. So typically an invoice will come in, we'll use capture technology to understand what's on that invoice. We'll then match that data up against goods received note to make sure that we've received the product. We'll match it up against purchase order data to make sure that somebody has placed an order for that product. And ultimately, if we can match that up, we can automatically push that into an ERP system or finance system, and nobody has to touch it. How good does that sound? If there are exceptions, if there are things that need to be checked, that's fine. We can use digital workflow to push that to somebody to eyeball it and say, is this correct or does something need to change? Ultimately, though, that can then be pushed again into an ERP system or a finance system. This is about making your life easier. It's about making operations as quick and as efficient as possible. And we do that all the time. If that sounds interesting, then get in touch. That's enough from me. Back to the podcast. All right. When you speak to a business, there are often these kind of idiosyncratic little processes. I've been practicing that one for a while. That are real specific to them or their industry. I'm just thinking of the one around kind of vaping oils. I don't know if we can talk too much about it, but going on and having to. Well, you can explain what they have to do.
Yeah, so so they basically are a testing company, a certification company for vape oils, and ultimately what they have to do is they get sent products from all sorts of different vape oil manufacturers, and then it goes to a laboratory. They have to do the tests, and then there's all sorts of information. I was surprised at the levels of information. Shouldn't be really, I guess, because there's a health concern to those things. But some of these vape oils can have 100 ingredients, and then you have to enter all those ingredients onto government and EU portals. You have to substantiate that they're all healthy, the levels, etc., etc. And that particular company were drowning, it's fair to say, in the levels of information required, but also the time it was taking to get it onto these portals. And it's not like government portals are running like uber efficiently, as we touched on right at the start. So there's delays, and the dreaded whirring circle that just goes round and round and round. And then when you're trying to get something uploaded and you've got hundreds of certifications to do in a day, a week, that can be particularly time consuming. So we put a bot in there, and we've halved the time it's taken. We've halved the backlog in about 4 to 6 weeks.
Amazing. And
they're now really positive in that actually what was holding them back from growing the business was that they couldn't cope with what they had. Yeah. So now actually, as they've named it, Spectro, the bot, is doing that hard graft. And actually, they're now happy to go out and start looking for additional new business because they know that it can handle it and it can work 24/7. Yeah. Happy days.
Well, you were talking about employees and engagement, weren't you? Somebody was previously sitting, watching that circle go round. Yeah. And so you wouldn't want to do it, would you? You'd put it off to the last possible moment. And that's why the backlog emerges and everything else. So people shouldn't be sat there doing those tasks, should they?
No, agreed. So, Neil, what about you? What else are you kind of seeing in the market?
Same thing, really. I've won my first RPA sort of project this week, actually. And it was interesting. We tried to solve it with a workflow tool previously, but actually the bot became a better fit because of the multiple different handoffs of data. So the company, for speed, they're still using Excel to actually collate a lot of the inquiry information. And because of the products that they sell, there's quite a lot of data to sort of pull out. But then again, post-sale, it was a case of there was having to input that data. And again, they had zeros and accounting software, which is quite sort of modern, I guess, cloud-based and got APIs and whatnot. But again, not everything could link with it. So, and then they had a manufacturing sort of MRP sort of product that would do all the scheduling and other bits and pieces. But again, it was all those different handoffs. You'd have to have multiple things with multiple sort of connectors, whereas the bot can actually move data around where it needs to go and a lot more efficiently. So a bit like you said, instead of just starting from scratch and obviously getting a brand new ERP or trying to find a system that's bespoke or whatever that does everything, these bots seem to be doing that handoff, that sort of data entry piece, which speeds up process massively. So it's because otherwise, as a business grows, well, which they did in the last couple of years, they had to increase headcount. So they had 2 or 3 people in an admin role that was literally doing those sort of pieces and shuffling information.
Yeah, they would have found it difficult as well, wouldn't they? Because they had a very bespoke piece of manufacturing software that was running their kind of operation back of house, as it were. So as Steve said, you wouldn't want to have to replace that. Trying to find something that could replace that when it's been written in-house specifically for them is going to be very difficult, isn't it?
Yes.
And we know that bespoke software is good to a point, but you don't want to just keep on throwing stuff at it, do you? Kind of creating new modules. Yeah. You want services that sit around it, microservices that sit around it, that can feed it, that are very good at best at breed at what they do to enable it to work best.
I'm experiencing that at the minute because I'm looking at professional services as automation software for us as an organisation that ideally that will manage everything that we do in one place. But to find a tool that operates the way that we operate, or close enough for it to go, let's take that off the shelf and let's use it. It's just not possible. And we end up with, Jira for managing workload and another product for CRM and best of breed, as you say, because that's what we need in order to make us work. And RPA can fill the gaps between those kind of best of breed products.
And I think with the RPA piece is, it increases your office output exponentially. Then we'll say that. Actually, I was worried about that.
Good words today.
Well, because if you think about it 24/7, it can operate. And actually, on top of that, let's say you've got half a dozen processes, you could split that into 4 hours on each process every day, and it will just keep working away. And I think that's the beauty of it, that we're coming to we're getting customers to see and value, is that actually it's not just one particular process. It could be, well, that's my main one at the moment, but I know these are nagging away, and actually down the line, let's look at adding that process onto it. And you only really technically, if it works and everything doesn't have to be done at the same time, you could just have a bot that does 4, 5, 6 processes. 4 hours a process, jobs are good. And I was talking to someone at the weekend, and they were saying one of the largest construction civils companies have told them that they have a certain window when the invoices need to be received. And I can only imagine that's because a bot is on the AP process between X and Y, get your invoices in. And if it's slightly out, it gets rejected, because probably the bot's thinking, well, I wasn't expecting it to be formatted like that, and bounces it back. Please resupply. And it's
I think allows you to do some more of those edge cases that probably don't have a financial return on their own in some cases, doesn't it? So you've got this main process that you're using your bot for, but the bot's got some downtime. So what do you fill it with? So those processes you might not have, had a return for, but now because
pooling them together.
I
think it comes back to, as well, in terms of technology, there's always that curve, that early adopters, and obviously big blue chips have been using this technology for a while. Yes, okay, the technology is getting better and better, but then as the price point comes down, it becomes more accessible for small to medium businesses, and all of a sudden the adoption obviously grows a lot quicker. And then people start once they get their head in that sort of mud, they start spotting bottlenecks within the business. They very quickly see. And obviously, like you say, with AP, it's a case of you get put on stop if it's orders. It's like, I ain't fulfilled that order. So you very quickly get people shouting at you from both angles, but whether it be credit control, whether it be even from HR, like we said, onboarding process. But really, that adoption piece for me, it's hitting that point, that price point in the market where people are going, well, hang on. So I can pay a member of staff that, or I can get a bot to work 24/7 for that. Well, why? So, and again, especially for businesses that are wanting to scale, or people that are wanting to sell the business, if they can get it out of people's heads and trying to systemize and automate certain processes, then it makes it easier to exit as well. I've had a few of those customers recently as well.
There's a great, I think it's Gartner phrase, they call it the Trough of Disillusionment, I think, which is where you get new technology when it really hypes up and everyone goes mad about it, blockchain or whatever. And then it kind of crashes because actually it's the wrong price point, or we've not really found the use cases to actually get true value out of that technology, and it falls into the trough of disillusionment. And then over time, it picks back up again and starts to take off. And I think we've seen that with RPA. I feel like AI with ChatGPT coming onto the market in the last couple of months, I feel like that's coming out of its trough of disillusionment, and actually we're going to see really that come into industry over the next few years far more than it has.
They've done very clever the way that they've done that with ChatGPT, because they made it free, didn't they?
Yeah.
And then they had the fastest level of subscribers out of all of the sort of, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Twitter or Instagram or whatever. It was like within a week or 5 days they got 1 million subscribers. So, but from then a tech valuation point of view, all of a sudden it's gone through the roof. But then it's the people that are gonna create the front ends and have that in the back end that are going to be the winners, I guess. Is how do you take that and make it easy, link it together? Because again, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's been loads of applications in the last couple of weeks that like Zapier, for example, you can now connect it to other things, and all of a sudden it's like, right, okay, this is going to take off in loads of different areas.
I think if you've got something like that anybody can ask a question of in any way, shape or form and get some kind of response back for it, drives that ability to be able to scale it into an adoption like that really quickly, doesn't it?
They're already talking about the next version of it being even more intelligent, which is crazy.
Yeah, I think this is version 4, I think, the one that's available online at the minute. But yeah, you're right. And I think it's just going to completely take off now, particularly with Microsoft getting involved in terms of the investment.
Well, the skill sets, I watched one guy guy who was talking about the skill sets of the future, if you like, is how to leverage this technology. It's more about how to actually ask it questions in a way that it's going to elicit the information back. That's going to be
people
usable.
spoke about that about Google, didn't they? It's like
Google
Kung Fu. Like, how do you use Google to get the best results from it? So it's no different really to that, is it?
Do you think it'll have an impact? Just thinking on what you both said there on, because I didn't go to university, but now potentially students could just talk to a chat GPT and go, write me a thesis on whatever.
Yeah.
And then
I think the schools are already talking about it. How do they either stop people using it, or probably more work together with the technology as opposed to stop people using the technology?
I think there is actually, well, again, there's always ways around it, but there's certain AI that can tell whether it's been written by AI, if you see what I mean. So that, but then I've seen one guy get a way around it. He asked ChatGPT to write him something. He then put it into another tool like Grammarly, redid the words, and then outputted something else, and then tried to put it back through the test, and it fooled it. It got to like, this is 98% certain it was a human. And it was like, wow, okay. Well, I've used 2 AI tools and I've just written a massive course.
Well, there'll be massive investment in people trying to work out how you can do that in essence. It won't know how you can take that output and say for sure whether it's a human or whether it's ChatGPT. So
I worry my son will be doing that.
Yeah.
But you get the students of today are going to have that technology at their fingertips. So it's not, for me, it's not a case of how do you stop them using it, because they're going to be able to use it in the future. It's more how do they harness it to the best effect? Yeah, and that's what schools should be encouraging.
Because the thing that they said the same argument about a calculator. That's cheating. You've got a calculator. Then it's a case of, okay, it's a tool to be used. How do we then design the tests so you can...
You're not going to have a calculator in your pocket every day. That was the famous saying, wasn't it? Yeah.
No, now you do.
You do. Yeah, absolutely.
Got the full internet.
What other technologies are we seeing? Do we expect to take off over the next few years in terms of the automation market?
So I think we've talked about kind of structural documents in terms of the NHS forms. We've talked about semi-structural documents in terms of invoices and orders and all those sorts of things. I think there's been a big push recently to take our unstructured data. That's the next big challenge, and that's why ChatGPT in some respects works, doesn't it? Because it's using an unstructured command to give you unstructured content back out. So yeah, I mean, there are various projects on the go to be able to, for instance, data mine emails coming in. So can you understand who's sending you an email, what the subject is, who should be involved, how you kind of categorize it, all those sorts of things. Because just as you've got a traditional mailroom where posts used to come in and be distributed out, people's inboxes are now that digital mailroom, aren't they? And you've got inquiries coming into businesses all the time that maybe are an order in an email, or maybe are a complaint, or maybe are whatever else part of the process that still, even though it's unstructured, it still needs some action taken. So understanding unstructured data would probably be the next big challenge. And there is, there's systems that have been around for a while, kind of mailroom systems, classification systems that you can kind of feed unstructured data, and they'll start to understand the common themes, and they'll use language interpretation to understand, what the subject is and all those sorts of things, so that mainly so it can be classified and sent to the right departments or the right downstream process, as it were. That'll be the next big thing.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because like we've just said about the calculator analogy and things like that, ChatGPT and similar softwares are going to be a massive aid going forward for personal use and business use. But just as we're still going to need, great news for us humans, we're still going to need like humans ultimately, because the thing that's proper winding me up at the moment is you buy something, it's faulty, you can never speak to someone. You go down a myriad of bases as to what your complaint is. It's this, press 1, it's that, press 2, or whatever. And then at the end of it, you still don't get to speak to someone. It's like, go onto our website. Brilliant, thanks for that. I've wasted 10 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back. And then over the weekend, we bought a table and there was some damage. And my wife came back to me after like 25 minutes going, do you know what? I have no idea how I'm going to talk to someone in customer services to get this. There's nothing on the website. There's nothing in the documentation. And that I think businesses, maybe the larger organizations, just to be mindful that, do you know what, totally get the whole efficiency thing, because after all, that's one of the things we do is offer, solutions for efficiencies. But it's like you still need that ability to be able to talk to someone or communicate with someone so that you can get a quick resolution rather than actually, there's only so far a bot or a ChatGPT, module or whatever can go before it's like, do you know what? Yeah, I don't really know that.
Yeah, well, that's what automation is usually about, though, isn't it? It's usually, taking the 100 documents and automating the 80 and leaving the 20, as it were.
I don't like being the 20, though, Rich.
You don't like being the 20?
No, I don't want to be in the 20.
Well, as long as there's somebody there to talk to, even if you are in the 20, then you're okay, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you can identify the 20 without actually somebody having to look through the 100, and you can work out who the person is to deal with that 20 and give them a task and say go off and do it, then the job's done, isn't it? At least you haven't looked at the 100 and you've automated the 80, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. You're right. You're still going to need humans to make decisions. It's being presented with the question almost, isn't it? What action do we need to take because there is an exception?
And actually on that, that's a really good point, because on that, actually what you want is when you are one of the 20, even though I don't want to be, but when you are one of the 20, you want enough information so that when you do speak to someone, they go, do you know what? No problems at all. Do this or do that. Whereas at the moment, you've gone through all of that, you've answered all the questions, and then they go, right, so can you tell me what's the problem? Are you joking me? I've just spent 10 minutes doing that.
I mean, that's just poor automation. I do think that 80%, we always talk about the Pareto principle, 80-20, don't we? But I think that 80%, as automation matures, will increase and increase and increase, and it will become 85%, 15, and 90-10. And I think, check my maths.
Automation, definitely, but it's also looking at the reasons why. So earlier on, when we said, focus on invoice processing, but actually it's the order management that needs to be done. It's good data in, isn't it, and good data out. Yeah. So usually any automation project doesn't have to be AP. As long as you've got the right data feeding that process throughout, then you're going to get less exceptions.
Yeah, it'd be quite interesting that if you could overlay a bit of AI on that and literally do some mining before you implemented it and said, right, based on X, Y, Z of these orders that we've looked at, we know that these percentage or these are the ones that are saying that, yeah, this wouldn't work or whatever. It kind of does a bit of analysis before it even goes ahead.
So we're doing that, aren't we? On recent projects, we're looking at supplier data, we're looking at order data, we're advising early in terms of if you improve this data now, then when we've implemented your automation solution, actually the results you get will be better than if you had it today.
Yeah, sometimes you don't need to look at the data per se either. It's just by talking to the people that are at the coalface processing those transactions. They'll tell you what their headaches are and the problems that they're having, and then usually from that you can say, well, that'll be because of X, Y, and Z. And quite often that's a downstream process, something that happens before it gets to them that needs a bit of tightening up.
All right. Last question. I always ask everybody this question, Rich, and I never give them a warning. So, Tomorrow's Workplace Today is the name of the podcast. So, cast your mind forward. How long do I ask? 10 years?
You do know.
Cast your mind forward 10 years. What does the workplace of 2033 look like? Describe that to me.
Well, it's going to be interesting. I think that's going to be driven by the types of people that are going to be working in it. So you can already see a younger generation coming through that are more used to having information at their fingertips, more used to using search capabilities rather than going into a filing cabinet and know where something is. So it's going to be driven by what people want from their daily work, isn't it? So I think that search capability, information at my fingertips, quick, rapid responses, rather than spending lots of time entering information in and doing admin tasks, which people seem to be happier with doing previously. They want to be doing something that's a bit more fulfilling, that's using their brain, as it were, rather than just pure kind of repetitive tasks. And so that's our challenge, isn't it? How do we make it, the technology that we've got, fit that requirement so that we can keep people engaged in the work that they need to do?
Good stuff. On that note, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Richard Fishburn.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks for having me.